Starting. All right. Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode 25. We've made it almost half a year. This is pretty exciting. Today we're going to have some special guests from Divshot, which is a great company based over in California. So I'll just ask Michael Bleigh, who is the CEO, and Kevin Chau, who's if I pronounce that right, I'm sorry, Kevin.
It's, you got Kevin's. Actually, I'm Michael Bleigh, but that's okay. It's spelled wrong, so.
I love live broadcasts, so sorry.
No worries.
I'll let you guys talk about what you do and who you are.
Sure. So I'm Michael Bleigh, CEO of Divshot. Basically, Divshot is a platform as a service for front-end applications. So we're sort of taking the old idea of static web hosting and reevaluating it for the modern web app age, which I think fits in pretty well with the Web Platform Podcast. We started 2.5 years ago. We're just trying to build the best platform for developers we can, and I'll let Kevin introduce himself as well.
Yeah, I'm Kevin. I do all of the marketing and biz dev stuff over at Divshot. So in terms of static Showdown, it's something we spend more time than our investors would like, I'm sure, building out an awesome place where people can build stuff with a restriction on their stack. And when you do that, people come up with really creative ways to do things that they would usually build in like Rails or PHP or something, and it just seems to work out. And we've been having really good turnout. Turnout is probably going to be double this year of last year, and it's great. Divshot, the platform itself, has been around for close to a year now, and things are going really well.
Yeah, can you guys tell us about how you guys started before we get into the static Showdown itself?
Sure, yeah. So actually, Divshot came out of a hackathon in Kansas City. My co-founder, Jake, I actually met him at a startup weekend in Kansas City. I had the idea for basically a drag-and-drop HTML editor that didn't suck. So it would be based on Bootstrap. It would actually export clean HTML. And that's actually, that was Divshot, and that's where we got started. So it was called Divshot out of the gate. We had this hilarious basketball visual theme to it because Divshot, but it was an idea that I liked a lot, and so we just sort of kept cranking on it. And I mean, one thing led to another. We ended up in the Launchpad LA Accelerator with Divshot, and that was still for the visual HTML editor. But basically, while we were building the infrastructure for Divshot, the HTML editor, I realized I was building with this sort of separate front-end app methodology, where it's like I'm going to have a front-end app that talks to back-end services completely independently of trying to run that inside a Rails app or inside a back-end serving app. And I really liked that architecture, but basically there wasn't a platform out there that was, hey, deploy your front end and actually take it serious like you're a developer, instead of just here's a place you can put up your landing page if you're a designer, or the website you design for some company. So we sort of just stumbling into this big hole in the market for what I thought was really the way to go for web development. So that's sort of how we started working on Divshot, the platform. And basically, it was just taking the idea of let's take front-end deployment as seriously as everyone takes back-end deployment, and that gave us a lot of interesting ideas and ways to go, because there's so much that you can do in browsers now that you couldn't do 2-3 years ago, and especially 4 or 5 years ago. The landscape's just changing so dramatically, so fast.
Yeah. So you said you were talking about taking front-end development as seriously as back-end development, and I can relate to that pretty heavily. So who I work for, we have a problem outside of our studio at times, convincing people outside of our studio that front-end development is actually a thing that needs to be considered in the development process. I mean, it's true. Well, they consider development of all kinds of all this one, this one chunk, and so we're making pretty good progress. But things like Divshot, when there are platforms geared just around it, to be like, you should account for this stuff while you're trying to go for proposals and things like that. That somebody actually has to build the thing that's pretty.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, there's so much to it now. I mean, I started, I used to call myself a designer and a developer. Like, I was like, oh, I'm full stack. I can do the design. I can do the development. And like the expectations of users, of developer, like the expectations across the board, like the bar has been raised so high compared to where it was when I started, that it's just, it's just a whole different world. And so, you sort of, I think there's a lot of people who don't realize that sort of sea change has happened, that the front end has become a thing that needs to be taken seriously. And that's because, like all things on the web, it just evolves organically. So you have, a little change here, a little change there, add that up over 5 years, and all of a sudden the browser's a legitimate app platform.
Yeah, I think that's really true. When I started as well, JavaScript was still like a toy. So people would be like, oh, well, JavaScript, that's easy. Just throw it in there. Shoehorn it in. Make it work. And now it's exciting. I did the static showdown with Chris and our friend Adi, who's in Noida, India. And we did the code out application, which we've been so lazy about not following up on. But it was so much fun. I was sort of like, oh my god, now I got to learn something new because we're forced to use your platform for the showdown. But once I started using it, the CLI and everything, I was like, wow, this is pretty impressive, like what you can do. So you had the concept of environments, which I hadn't seen for front end before, which was really awesome, and it was so easy to promote from one to the other. Can you talk about some of the features?
Sure. Yeah. Can you plug your platform for a minute? Yeah, I can do that.
All right.
I mean, basically, we're just trying to build the platform that we want to use as developers. So, one of the things that I've always found kind of frustrating is, every shop wants to have multiple environments. You want to be able to say, okay, like I want a staging environment, and I want to make sure everything's okay, and then I need some sort of pipeline to put that into production. And so we're like, let's just make that a first-class platform feature. Another thing that, and we're taking inspiration. So Heroku had the idea of these environment variables that you just, using the command line, you quickly configure, then those are available to your application. And that's just a really slick way to work. So in the front-end world, obviously you don't have environment variables the same way, but we created something like that where you can configure variables that are then available as either a JavaScript include or JSON on your application. And so we're just really trying to make it easy for developers to build these modern apps and just do things the way that they want to be done. So we're not trying to shoehorn anyone into, oh, you need to use this or that framework. We know that there's a reason that people want to use Angular for one app or React for another app or Polymer for this app or Ember for another app. And we're not trying to make those kinds of decisions for people, but there are common problems like single-page applications. How do you do the routing for that? And the idea of running an entire Heroku dyno for the purpose just of, hey, point everything to index.html is overkill. So we provide that sort of single-page app routing built in, and we're sort of, all of this is built around our open source static server that's called SuperStatic, and that's sort of the approach that we're taking. It's static web serving, but it's sort of static web ++. So we're taking the things that you need to build a really slick modern browser app. We're just building those into the platform, taking care of it for you. Everything's on a CDN. You don't have to configure that. You don't have to purge it. It's just all taken care of for you. And we think that that's a really powerful paradigm. And I'm also personally heavily invested in the idea that you should deploy your front end separately from your back end. They're two different things. That there was a time when it made all the sense in the world to have it be one thing, but I think that time is passing.
Michael, I couldn't agree with you more about separating the front end from the back end. I think it works really, really well when you don't have constraints that make it impractical or impossible. So it's great to see that you have this platform. And Eric and we had one of your guys, Scott Corrigan, if I remember correctly. We had him come on readthesource.io and walk through the source code of your open source static server that I think it's called Superstatic. And it's really really was pretty enlightening to see all the things going on in there that are different from, I mean, you just don't think about it when you think about a static application. What kind of stuff did you guys run into? What kind of things that were you beating your head against the wall that made you want to write your own static server instead of wrapping up something in Nginx or whatever?
So, I mean, Nginx is great. Don't get me wrong. Like those things, if you want to do that configuration, but what it really was is, you think about the pace and the sort of, quick maintainability that you want, and like, sure, you can write a complex Nginx config that can do probably most of what Superstatic does, but having this just declarative JSON that lives with your application, so as your application's needs change, you just tweak a JSON setting here or there, having that just sort of be such a simple way to do the things that you need for these modern apps was really a driving force. It was like, how easy can we make this for developers? Like, let's take away all the pain. And I mean, there are some things that are a lot more complicated than you'd think. Like, especially, you think of the idea of like clean URLs. So like, all I want to do is drop the .html from the end of URLs when that makes sense automatically. And there's a lot more to that than you'd expect, because you have to deal with things like, what's the difference between something that is a directory with an index.html or is just a file name with a .html? One of the things that we ran into is if you're using relative URLs, if it's a directory index, you need to add a trailing slash because relative URLs are going to be expecting everything to be in that directory. But if it's not a directory index, then you need to make sure there's not a trailing slash because that'll screw up relative URLs. So like, it's sort of just codifying all of these, difficult decisions and making them for you. So, I mean, I came from the Rails world, convention over configuration. We have our set of defaults that we think are the right way to go. You can configure most of it differently if you want, but we're just trying to make it easy to do that. So it's really just about, taking a look at the problems that front-end developers have and saying, like, can we solve this in a convention-based way? What can we add? How can we make this better?
So you're just talking about like setting up, I guess, intelligent defaults, things like that, convention over configuration. But what about times where maybe you do need to configure your application or your hosting server? So for example, like proxying is a big thing. I know for us, because we build our front end apps that sit separately from the API. So then we set up some kind of proxy so that we can hit the API with it no problem. So are there ways in Divshot to handle that kind of, those types of configurations?
Yeah, so we have some lightweight backend services, and we're still sort of trialing this out and figuring out exactly how it works with the platform. So they're still in beta, but we have an API proxy service because not everyone is comfortable using cores just yet. So because I mean, if you have to support IE less than 10, then you can't use cores completely properly. So we have an API proxy service where just a JSON configuration, you basically configure a little prefixed URL that you can send things to, and that'll shoot it over to another origin. We have a simple like contact form email service, because that was one of the things where it's like that is something that you can't do without a backend. You can't send an email without a backend. But if all you need is a contact form, like you don't need a full-fledged backend for that. And I think it's really interesting to see, you have backend as a service like Firebase, like Parse. You have these sort of, more modular. You don't need to write a backend. You can just use the front end. And I mean, that's what you can use, obviously, to build something with the static Showdown. But even if you're not doing that, even if you aren't using a backend as a service, the ability to just plug in these simple little services for this feature or that feature and build small backend services that are sort of loosely coupled. I mean, microservices is the buzzword, and I think that the reason that people are getting engaged with that is because everyone has the pain of a long-lived monolithic application where we've been building on this and adding to it forever, and everything's getting unwieldy. Everything about the velocity of development slows down over time just because you have so much mass already there. And if instead you're just trying to build these small little pieces that you can couple together, that just it creates a really different feeling. And that was really the epiphany for me in the let's have a different front end from a back end is you can be so focused because on the back end, I mean, I'm gonna my dirty little secret, I guess, is that one of my favorite things to do still is to write REST APIs in Ruby because Ruby's still my favorite language. But just even though Ruby's my favorite language, I love this architecture of a separate front end because when I'm working on the front end, all I'm considering is how do I present this to the user in the best way possible? And when I'm working on the back end, all I'm thinking about is how do I structure these resources in the best way possible to make it, a coherent thing to consume. So the separation of those concerns, I think, really just frees you up and makes development just feel a lot better.
So do you guys, I know you mentioned microservices. Are you guys planning on doing services similar to that, where you're going to enable developers to create their own quickly?
I mean, that's really a direction that we're still exploring. It's something we'd love to do. I think that really the platform as a service market overall is going to see a big shift in the coming years because I think right now everything's sort of focused around this basically VM-based architecture. And obviously Docker has been a huge force in development in the past year. Came out of it was sort of a long coming overnight success sort of thing, but with containerization. But I think that you're going to see things really shift as people start thinking more of, I'm just running these, even smaller than a VM. I'm just running these small application containers, and one app might end up being made of 12 different containers that all do a small thing. And sort of the benefit of that is, as I said, a smaller problem is easier to wrap your head around. So each individual service becomes its own application, which is a much easier development life cycle. The added complexity there is that now you have to coordinate and communicate between all those services. So, I mean, it's still very early for us in that regard, but we're trying to evaluate, how can we add value there? How can we say, Divshot is a place that can help you coordinate all of these services that you're building, maybe host them, maybe we'll provide a marketplace. I mean, we're still evaluating options, but I definitely see that as being sort of the future of platform as a service, is enabling you to build and coordinate these really small chunks of functionality that work well together.
It makes sense because when I talk with a lot of developers about microservices, and I don't talk a lot about it because I know very little, but the idea for those who aren't familiar is that you have these very, very small, maybe 100-line services or less even, and you don't have even tests for them. They're throwaway. So you put them up there, and there's just a lot of them. You don't have one monolithic service that you call for everything. So it's really useful in that sense to create something that quick and rapid, but there's been some criticism because of the lack of testing and things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think microservices you can test or not test. I mean, obviously testing is always going to be better, and it's a much smaller surface area, so it's a lot easier to completely test a microservice than it is to completely test a 100,000 line of code application.
Yeah.
I think that the real difficulty in microservice testing is in that coordination layer. It's like what happens when communication between like service A depends on B, C, and D, and C is broken but B and D are still working, and what happens like simulating that. And like I don't think that we have all the tooling that we need to make that really simple, and really like we don't have the full story there. But I think that that's the story that's going to develop. And what I love about like the web is that like the front end just fits into that really well, because you have, you know, with modern web tech, if you're able to use cores, the browser can actually be sort of your service coordinator. It's like I'm going to make one request to my authentication server, another to my user lookup service, another to my let's send emails service. And you can do all of that from the browser, hitting these different origins that may be hosted on entirely different infrastructure depending on the needs. And so that was one of the things that I really thought was interesting, is just thinking of the browser as this coordinating agent instead of just like this, you know, rendered output of a program.
So you were saying about the way that these microservices kind of get put together, and Eric was talking about testing. So it's almost like taking the same design patterns that are existing a lot in application development and applying them to a different format. So, for example, in Angular, you should, you know, like the idea is you create a bunch of these smaller services and then use a controller to stitch them all together, because it's much easier to test that one smaller service than it is to test, like you said, this one big controller. I mean, that's kind of a scaled down version of what you're talking about, but it seems like it's the same design pattern that already exists.
Well, and I mean, I think that it's no coincidence that things tend that way, because there's a great quote, and I don't remember who said it, but something to the effect of like, the best way to build a large application is not to build a large application. Yeah, so like anything large enough is just going to become unwieldy, and so like sort of the trick is to figure out how to abstract and modularize in the right way that you hit this sweet spot between pain of coordination and pain of massive inertia of a single large project. So. And I think that as with all things, like native apps versus web apps and modular versus monolithic, these are all sort of pendulums that we swing back and forth over time. And like as new advances come in one side of it, it swings all the way to that side. But then new advances come on the other side of it, and it swings back a little bit. And it's hopefully honing in on some sort of ideal perfect way to develop things. And I mean, obviously, we'll never have a perfect development environment, but it's really interesting to see those trends develop and to understand the reasoning behind both sides of it. There's completely legitimate reasons that you'd want to do completely opposite things, and that's an interesting thing about being a developer.
I think you said something really really interesting there, where when you did the quote with not to build an actual monolithic app. I thought it was great though that we're actually going through a lot of this pain on the client side applications, right? Where we have web components coming, and we've been trying to solve this problem with directives and other pieces to modularize. And I think I used to work at a Rails shop for maybe 3 years almost, and we would take that approach where, because it's we don't know what we're going to have to build, we would build something large, largish, and then we'd pull something out, and then if it's reusable, and then I think because of that nature, we do that with JavaScript as well now. With that nature, it's eventually you're going to still have so much stuff there, and it's going to be hard to pull stuff out eventually.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like that's natural. I mean, that's just like, I don't think there's any way around it, because unless you're willing to just build, I mean, a lot of people say that this is sort of the ideal way to build something. is to write it once, then throw everything you did away and write it again, only better this time. And nobody has time to do that every time, or at least not in my experience. But you brought up web components, which is something that obviously Divshot is super excited about. We've been pumped about web. Like the first day that Polymer was announced at Google I/O a couple of years ago, or 2.5 years ago, the first comment that I made on our corp chat was just like, this is super important. Everyone needs to learn as much about this as they can. Because it's just
now
like,
you guys are teaching it.
Yeah, we're doing our best. Like it's a huge new thing, and like as much as I've dove into it head first and spent as much time as I can learning about it, it's still a really new thing, and it's completely legitimate for people to have no idea what's going on with it, because it's not something by and large that is recommended for production just yet. So if you can't use it in your day job, it's completely legitimate to say, like, I need to wait on that. But I'm just so excited about it because to me it seems like it's just obviously the future. It takes the encapsulation it gives you, the ability to build these pluggable, like truly pluggable components, and the way that it encourages you to enforce these boundaries is just really great. It solves so many headaches that front-end developers have had for years that I don't think there's any chance that it doesn't become just a huge deal once it's ready for production.
That's the stuff that you guys have been doing. I didn't even realize when I did the Static Showdown that you guys had so much stuff open source. So when I went to your GitHub, it was pretty impressive. You have le.io, and you have a bunch of other, built with Polymer. So you guys have been really helping the community out with web components in particular, but in general for static applications. Can you talk to some of the work that you guys have been doing?
Sure. So we started a resource site, and this was sort of leading up to the first Static Showdown, called staticapps.org. The idea being just talking philosophically about these independent front-end applications and why you might want to build them, how to build them, best practices. And I mean, really all of this is just we're trying to participate and build the community towards where we see web development going. So it's not really like some conscious choice of like, oh, we're going to spend X hours on open source and we're going to spend Y hours on this meetup. But I think if you're going to run a company that's aiming to work with developers, that's just sort of what naturally happens. Is you have to be in the community, you have to be learning these things, you have to be teaching these things. Like, teaching is a great way to learn, honestly. Like, one of the best things about the Web Components meetup that we started for me is that like it gives me an incentive to like really learn a lot so that I can give a new talk next time, or try to encourage this or that. And I mean, the same thing goes for blogging. So we try to blog on a regular basis, and we try to release open source on a regular basis. And all of that is great for building, that's great for our company. It builds reputation and all of that, but it's also just, that's how you keep sharp as a developer. So it all just sort of falls in line. So yeah, I mean, our open source efforts, we knew that when we built this platform, we didn't want it to be something where, oh, we have all of these features, but once you start using them, you're just locked into our platform and you're totally out of luck if you want to go somewhere else. So we knew that we needed to build everything around this sort of open source kernel, and that's where SuperStatic came from. And that's probably our most sophisticated and long-term effort open source project at this point, just because that literally powers our platform. That's that's the engine under the hood that's running everything on Divshot. We put it in front of a CDN. We have some sophisticated deployment stuff on either end of it, but like that really is the heart. That's what's running. So being able to do that open source and having that make sense and still have a business model is fantastic, because open source is just like, I don't know, like that, I can't imagine doing anything doing it any differently. So yeah, I mean, and like things like LE, which is our sort of JS fiddle for web components, a a lot of that is just us experimenting and saying, like, we really want to play with these technologies. We want to have, and this is, I guess, to bring it back to the Static Showdown as well, like, one of the best things about hackathons for me is that it gives you a reason to ship something. And that's all that people really need a lot of the time, is you have all of these ideas floating around. It's like, oh, I could build this or I could build that. And the reality is that you have a limited amount of time. You know, whatever your main project is going to suck up most of that. And there's not really that incentive to ship something. So a hackathon gives you a chance to, like, set aside some time and say, like, you know what, I'm going to actually build something and I'm going to ship it. And maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it's totally broken at the end, but it will be more complete than if I hadn't done the hackathon.
So I think you said something really important to me in there. You were saying that you're not locked into to Divshot. So if you guys got bought up for $100 billion and dissolved, you could migrate your application to your own hosted static server with a super static.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can run super static locally, and the same way that you can run it locally, you could run it on a web server somewhere. Now, I mean, we do have the advantage in that, you know, to run it somewhere else, you're going to have like a full VM up and running, which is going to run you more than a Divshot subscription anyway. So, you know, our multi-tenancy gives us the ability to, like, make that a good value. Plus, you get CDN and all these other things thrown in for free. But at the end of the day, like, if there's a reason that, like, you can't use Divshot, like everything has to be on premise or something like that, you can still use our same technology stack with, like, no difference and, like, put that somewhere else. It's just going to be a lot more of a hassle. And I mean, that's what I think the greatest open source, like, that's what I think the companies that work with, like, open source and then also have this software as a service have really identified. You look at WordPress, you know, you can throw up WordPress on any web server anywhere, but WordPress.com still has tons and tons of business because, you know, it's a lot easier than throwing it up on any server anywhere, just clicking a button, and now you have a WordPress account. So I really think that if you trust people, like, developers will pay for convenience, and people generally will pay to save time because it costs time and it costs effort and it costs headspace to understand how to run something and to run it well. And so any time that I can, like, outsource a problem, I'm going to do that immediately. You know, we not too long ago shipped analytics so that you can see the bandwidth that you're using month by month, how many requests your apps are getting. And as far as tracking that, we're using Keen.io, which is a great startup that sort of outsources that custom analytics building for you. And so, and that's what I really love about sort of the current wave of developer startups, is it's just like peeling off these pieces of difficult functionality and just solving that for you. You know, it's like Stripe is just giving you a way to not have to worry about payments. Keen is giving you a way to not have to worry about analytics. You know, Divshot's hopefully giving you a way to not have to worry about front ends, or at least deploying them. So, like, that's really, I think, the job of developer startups, is to just take something and not be sort of miserly and hoard it and try to make it all proprietary. But if you make something, like, take away a pain point that people have, they're going to use that.
So I'd like to wrap it around back to Static Showdown.
Sure.
If you guys don't mind too. That last year's competition, there was a lot of people using, like, WebRTC, and there was, you know, Angular and Ember apps. What are you guys expecting to see out of this year's competition as far as, you know, exciting technologies and things like that?
Well, we are hoping that people build really cool web components. So we've partnered with Polymer to hopefully encourage people to explore the whole web components world and what Polymer does, and build really cool stuff. So we've opened up a web components special prize just to encourage people, and people can win both first place and the web components prize. It's an add-on, and we just want people to use Polymer. It's great.
You guys think that there'll be things like service worker or anything used a lot?
Personally, I would be thrilled to see some service worker apps. Like service worker is just a mind-blowing technology, and the same way that I think that other than web components, it is probably the single biggest thing coming down the pike for browsers that's really going to change how everything works. So yeah, I'm really excited, and I hope to see some apps that are using service worker and really doing crazy stuff with offline or crazy stuff with caching or pre-request processing, or there's crazy stuff that you can do with it, and I haven't had as much time as I'd like to play with it, so I'd love to see what other people come up with.
Yeah, some of the things
Listen to our previous episode.
Yeah, I tell you, it was really surreal. Those guys are super smart.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But I mean, it's interesting with the judges and the prizes last year. I was shocked that I had people like Zach Holman and Ezra actually looking at our app and critiquing it and giving constructive criticism for free. So that was pretty awesome. To have people in the community sort of take their time and do this. And I saw you had Hampton, who created SAS, and you had butcher's name.
Yeah.
Chris. Formerly.
Yeah, Kevin can speak better to the final tally of judges because he's been sort of rounding that up. But I just want to say that I've been so blown away, both with the sponsors of the Showdown and the judges, just giving their time and doing this. We had no idea what was going to happen the first time we put the Static Showdown together. I was like, you know what? I love the Rails Rumble. I love the Node Knockout. I think that this could be sort of a third tentpole hackathon if we do this right. And I mean, the way that it came together, I take almost no credit for it. It's just we reached out to people and we were like, hey, we'd really appreciate if you do that, and just so many people said yes, and nobody had to. So all of our judges, all of our sponsors, it was just it just shows you how vibrant of a community developers have, where it's just sure, I'll take 3 or 4 hours of my time just to give feedback on people's hackathon applications, and and that's something that. The only thing that I'll take credit for there is that we specifically instructed judges to give at least a few sentences of constructive feedback, because I remember from my time doing tons of hackathons that was really one of the most rewarding things, is just having someone take a look and tell me honestly what they think, and being able to think on that. And even if the hackathon project isn't going to continue and be a company like Divshot happened to, that feedback is just so invaluable and rewarding, because you're getting the opinion of somebody that you respect, and that's a great thing to have.
So what was the community feedback that you got from the judges, from developers, and non-developers that participated?
I mean, overall, everyone, I was surprised at how smoothly everyone else seemed to think it would go, and I imagine that anyone who's organized a hackathon would probably say the same thing. Behind the scenes, it's a total mess. We're scrambling to put everything together at just the right time. This isn't nobody's doing hackathons. Almost nobody's doing hackathons as a full-time thing. So that it came together smoothly, and that people seemed to think that was great. But I mean, really, the stars of a hackathon are the people who participate and the people who take a whole weekend and sleep barely at all and just put something together. So when I was nervous going into it, I'm like, I don't know how familiar people are with these backend as a service like Firebase. I don't know how sophisticated and how quality the apps are going to be. And it was also our sort of big coming out party for the Divshot platform as well last year. So it was this is a lot of pressure, and when we saw the quality of applications that got submitted, when the winners turned out to be such really cool things and so diverse. Like we had everything from an analytics platform that tracked your mouse movements and was able to like send that data back, to GIFSnap, which was like a social network for little 5-image GIFs, which, I mean, that's prescient. Like, I'm sure that things like that are like, it's not like Instagram and all of those things aren't doing videos and looping images now. You had the Our Story, which I don't even know how they pulled all that data down from Facebook just on the client and created this, like, it just blew me away. It's like I expected that maybe we'd see like a bunch of like collaborative drawing applications because you have Firebase, and so everyone's going to try to do like a collaborative app. But like the variety of apps was what really blew me away, because it's just like, man, you can, like, even with the constraint of you can't write any back-end code, people came up with all of these different things, and that was really impressive.
Yeah, I don't think there was much foul play on any of it. There might have been one or two that we were looking at, but I think it was overall everyone had such a great positive attitude.
Yeah, and I mean, like, one thing that we've learned, and we already, like, I had already sort of learned this lesson from just watching the Rails Rumble as it evolved. Crowd favorite is a dangerous prize to award, because if you're motivated, that's something that you can game very well. So we're not doing a crowd favorite this year. It's going to be all based on judge feedback.
I know the app you're talking about too.
and I mean, I'm
you're
not
watching
here to
those tweets go up and up, like, whoa.
And I mean, it's something like it makes sense. Like, it makes sense in your head, because it's like, like, I want to know what people think is, like, what people like, what's a really popular or viral thing. But, like, at the end of the day, it's really just about, like, people building stuff. Like, I've been blown away with how many prizes we've been able to put together. The credit for that all goes to Kevin. He's the one who wrangled all of the judges, all the prizes, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you got cash, Chromebooks, all sorts of great stuff. Even the Moto 360s, I think, this year.
Yeah, is the Moto 360 the Polymer prize or the Web Components prize? Yeah. So
build those web components. Yes.
But yeah, it's just like, it's hard running a hackathon, because I take seriously, I've read articles that are like, hackathons are bad for X reason, because people do them for the wrong reasons and things like that, and you see things like $1 million hackathon or a $50,000 hackathon, and like, the stakes, like, when you raise the stakes too high, you're just sort of encouraging foul play. And so trying to find a balance of, like, let's find prizes that people will think are fun, that reward them for, like, trying and doing a good job, but aren't so amazing that people are going to be, like, trying to cheat rampantly and use existing code and do all of these other things to win. We don't have the resources to, like, police that to the nth degree, and so we sort of have to rely to a degree on the community just, like, doing things in good faith, and then we do our best to double check that good faith. So
yeah, it was really cool. We were watching the Twitter feed for Static Showdown, at Static Showdown, and people were saying when things were happening, and they were talking about their projects. It was really fun to watch until you got really tired and needed more coffee. But and I don't know that I'll be able to do it this year. I haven't signed up yet, because I almost lost my marriage last year doing this, 48 hours straight. So I may have to pass on this one, but I really loved it. It was such a it's one of the better development experiences I've ever had.
How long do people have to sign up for it?
So registration closes on January 22nd, and we are at we're close to 500 people who have registered now. So get your names in the bucket and write some code.
What do you think the most important thing that teams should really take away from the Static Showdown?
So we have a really good blend of judges. Some some technical, some non-technical. There's a few amount of designers on there, and good design goes a lot into making your app. So what we noticed last year was that the top quality apps had really good design, and they came from teams that had a UX designer or an interaction designer on board. So don't overlook design when you form your team and when you create your app.
Definitely. We almost had a UX designer, but he had to bail last minute. So.
And
I had to deal with my crappy images on there.
And I mean, just to throw in as far as takeaways, like, you know, I think that it's good to go into a hackathon thinking about what you want to get out of it. Like, some hackathons that I've done in the past, I've gone in and I'm like, I am going all out, and I'm trying to win this thing. Like, not because like I want to be like I just want to rip everyone's throats out, but just because it's good to like feel competitive and to like work hard at that. Other times I've been like, you know what? There's this technology that I've wanted to learn and wanted to play around with and haven't had time. So I'm going to go into this hackathon. I'm not expecting to win, but I want to learn this technology and I want to ship something that at least halfway works. And so I think, like, you know, decide what you want to get out of it. You don't have to be competitive to have a great time at a hackathon. You know, just like do the hackathon for yourself, for your own development, for your own, you know, personal growth. If you want to not sleep at all and pound the Red Bulls and coffee all weekend and like do that, then like do that like once in a long while. But if you want to take it easy and, you know, work maybe like 8 hours a day both days and turn in something a little smaller, do that too. Like there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot of things great with that. So it should really be about. Sorry, what was that?
It might keep your wife. Sorry, it might keep your wife from taking the kids and going to your mother-in-law's house.
You know, we had a whole system plan for this because Adi, one of our teammates, he's in Noida, like I said, and the time zone is totally different. So, you know, we would take, you know, a couple of hours sleep at a time, and we'd wake up, and the other person would be already, oh, I got to go to sleep now. So we had this whole thing planned, but we were so into it that we didn't sleep much at all. So I think I got the most sleep. Christian and Adi got hardly any. It was a lot of fun. And you know, is there anything people should do other than sign up? I think it's a great idea to get designers, even product managers, to guide it, because it's 48 hours long. You're going to need somebody who's really good at organization.
Hey, let's not get crazy.
I was not that guy for organization, so.
Honestly, if you have someone who's non-technical but like is really excited about the idea of contributing, think about like how much better your app is going to be perceived by judges if you have like documentation or fleshed out copy on your landing page, or like all of the things, like the things that go along with applications that aren't necessarily building an application. So there's definitely ways for less technical people to like contribute meaningfully to hackathons. And I mean, honestly, if I'm in it to win a hackathon, I basically start with like the judge's experience that I want, and then I just build backwards from that. So like the landing page is one of the first things I'll do. It's not the last thing that I do, because it's like this is the first thing the judges see. So it's got to be super impressive, and I spend like, you know, way more time than you'd think just on making that, because like you can't help the fact that you have this sort of first impression when you first see something, and that's just a human thing. So, you know, if you're in it to win it, I would say really concentrate on polish. Cut features like crazy, but polish everything that you actually ship. And if you're just doing it for the fun of it, then just do whatever you want. Like, build a bunch of features and just don't even bother styling it. Have Times New Roman everywhere. Like, I don't know. Like, hackathons, hackathons for me were always an excuse to build an idea that I had in my head. And sometimes I thought that idea was competitive, sometimes I didn't. But it's always a fun thing to just take something from this is in my head to this exists in real life.
I spoke with Matt Claypotch after we had him on the podcast. He's a developer over at Mozilla. He works on the Brick project, and he's an evangelist now. And he was saying he entered and he did a pixel editor with web workers. And the reason he did it was he just wanted to build something with web workers and to get it running and to learn, just like you're saying, the exact same thing. So it was interesting talking and getting his feedback from it.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like, that's, if I were to say just like a secret to being a great developer, I'd say the biggest thing is just to constantly try new things, even if you don't think that they're very relevant to whatever you're doing at the moment, because you'd be surprised at how things cross-apply in unexpected ways, you know? An architectural decision that you make for like a game, like a hackathon game that you're just doing for the fun of it, may give you insight into some like giant enterprise application that you're working on at your day job. You just never know, and the important thing is just to like constantly build things and constantly tinker with things, and I think that's how you get good.
Does anybody have any other questions?
No, not awesome. Really, but if nothing else, you got one new customer out of this. I've got to give you a try.
Oh, you should.
Awesome.
You really should. Do it with Danny and Christian.
I was actually just thinking that. I was like, I don't think I have anything to do that weekend.
There you go. Yeah, so, I mean, if we're wrapping up, just one more plug for staticshowdown.com. Registration's open for about another week. Competition's the weekend of the 24th and 25th. Everything's UTC because that's just the easiest way to do it. So midnight UTC the 24th to 11:59 p.m. the 25th. Judging will be the week after. So if you're not otherwise engaged, build something fun. The constraints will liberate you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Before you go, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to get you guys?
So Twitter, I am Bleigh, so MBLEIGH. And also Divshot's on Twitter. Kevin is also on Twitter. I'll let him.
Yeah, K-Chau, K-C-H-A-U.
And I mean, you know, we are always pumped to talk to anyone about anything like related to front end or even not front end. You know, I came from the Ruby world. I still love all that stuff. So I just like being engaged in the developer community. So never be afraid or feel free always to hit me up about anything.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Thank you guys. And at SuperStatic also on Twitter is Static Showdown.
I was going to say, wow, did we set up as Twitter for SuperStatic? I didn't know that. Yes, at Static Showdown as well.
I'm going to go see if that's available. All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Bye.